It's okay. Good morning to everyone, and welcome to Defense Committee and the committee's first look at Bill C-77, an act to amend the National Defense Act and to make other related and consequential amendments to other acts. Appearing today for us is the Honourable Harjit Sajjan, Minister of National Defence, and the Commodore Bernatchez, Judge Advocate General, Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you very much for appearing. We only have the Minister till the top of the hour, and so I want to commence without delay. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Members of this.
You know, we had the Minister slated in for an hour. I want to just put it on the record that I think that the motion that was done in the House to force a vote took away a half an hour here. I think it was done on purpose by the department. It is, because it is reducing the amount of time that we have with the Minister, and I think that the Liberals should have took that in consideration before they actually moved that motion, so that we could have that opportunity to have the Minister for the entire hour, which had been promised to us. So I hope that the Minister...
We're just exasperating the time that we do have, so Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I can assure you there is no conspiracy here. Members of the Standing Committee on National Defence, distinguished colleagues, it's great to be here alongside with Judge Advocate General to discuss Bill C-77 and the important changes we are proposing to the National Defence Act. I'm looking forward to answering your questions at the end of my remarks, as always. As you know, Bill C-77 proposes a number of changes to the National Defence Act, and at the heart of these changes, it's about our people. The women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces who make the great sacrifices every single day in service to our great country. And this includes a military justice system that ensures that victims receive the support they need and deserve, and a system that promotes a culture of leadership, respect, and honor. Canadian Armed Forces members are held to a high standard of conduct, and they are expected to uphold and reflect Canadian values in everything that they do. So whether stationed in Canada or deployed around the world, we ask a lot of them every single day. So we have a responsibility to ensure that the rules that guide their conduct are transparent, equitable, and fair. These rules must reflect the current times and must be aligned with the Canadian values and those of the Canada civilian criminal justice system. Much of what is within Bill C-77 is an extension of work that our government is already doing to ensure that more have a more victim-centered approach to justice, to build on Bill C-65, our government's legislation against workplace harassment, to strengthen truth and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and to change military culture through Operation Honour in order to ensure the Canadian Armed Forces is a respectful workplace of choice for every Canadian. I'd like to take a moment to expand on the importance of Operation Honour. As many of you know in this room, Operation Honour aims to eliminate sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces. Both myself and the Chief of Defence Staff have been very clear that we have a zero tolerance for sexual misconduct of any kind in our Canadian Armed Forces. Through Operation Honour, we have introduced a new victims response center, better training for the Canadian Armed Forces personnel, and easier reporting. I would also like to note that the Canadian Armed Forces Provost Marshal recently released the results of a comprehensive review of previously unfounded sexual assault cases. Of the 179 cases examined, 23 cases have been reopened and identified for further investigation, and that we commend the Canadian Forces National Investigation Service and the Provost Marshal for their work in ensuring victims are heard. I would also like to acknowledge the important work of the Sexual Misconduct Resource Centre, who recently released their annual report, and we thank the SMRC for continuing to support Canadian Armed Forces members affected by sexual misconduct. I am also pleased to note that the SMRC is looking to provide looking at providing caseworkers to victims of inappropriate sexual behavior to ensure they have continuous support from when they first report an incident to when their case concludes. The work of the SMRC has been exceptional, and I know that the victims are being well supported as a result of their efforts. I would now like to turn to the legislation at hand and highlight Bill C-77 that will give victims a voice and to change our National Defence Act in 4 important ways. First, Like the civilian criminal justice system, it will enshrine important rights for victims. Second, it will seek harsher penalties for crimes motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on gender identity or expression. Third, it will ensure that the specific circumstances of Indigenous offenders are taken into account in the sentencing process. And fourth, it will reform the manner in which the Chain of Command administers summary trials. So Bill C-77 proposes the inclusion of the Declaration of Victims' Rights to the National Defence Act. This declaration mirrors the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights, which strengthens and guides how we support victims in civilian criminal justice system. Specifically, the bill would legislate 4 new victims' rights within the military justice system. They are the right to information, the right to protection, the right to participation, and the right to restitution. In order to ensure victims are able to exercise these rights, they will be entitled to the support of a victim liaison officer, should they request it. These liaison officers will be able to explain how service offenses are charged, dealt with, and tried under the Code of Service Discipline. They will help victims access information to which they are entitled, and they will remain available to assist the victim throughout their interaction with the military justice system. This ensures victims understand each stage of the process and how they can engage meaningfully throughout. The support they offer will be comprehensive, fair, and will always be offered in the spirit of preserving victims' dignity. Bill C-77 also specifically addresses issues of gender-based prejudice and hatred in military service offenses and infractions. The bill proposes harsher sentences and sanctions for service offenses and infractions motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on the gender expression of identity. Our women and men in uniform and those who work and live alongside them must feel welcomed and respected at all times. The Canadian Armed Forces has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. This amendment will better align the military justice system with that principle. And on that note, the defense team has been working hard through programs like the Positive Space Initiative to help create inclusive work environments for everyone, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And I commend them for their work on this initiative, which provides training to ambassadors in support of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and two-spirited community members that work with us every day. The next change I would like to focus on is how we propose updating the military justice system to better reflect the realities of historic injustices inflicted upon Indigenous peoples. In the civilian criminal justice system, the criminal code mandates that judges must carefully consider circumstances during sentencing. Specifically, for all offenders, they must consider all available sanctions, other than imprisonment, that are reasonable under the circumstances and consistent with the harm done to victims or to the community. This principle is to be applied with particular attention to the circumstances of Indigenous offenders. It is our shared responsibility to repair and renew our relationship with Indigenous peoples. As our Prime Minister has said on many occasions, no relationship is more important to our government and to Canada than the one we have with Indigenous peoples. By incorporating these considerations into sentencing, this legislation will ensure that our Canadian Armed Forces and our government continue on the right path forward. This is one of the elements that distinguishes Bill C-77 from similar legislation introduced by the previous government in the dying days of the 41st Parliament. I believe this addition strengthens this bill, and I'm proud to have it included here. And to that end, I trust that I can count on everyone's support to get this legislation passed in a timely manner. The last significant area of change brought about by this legislation relates to the summary trial process. The JAG can speak to these changes in greater detail, but I want to quickly address the changes and their effects as well. To date, minor breaches of military discipline have been handled through summary trials. Our proposed legislation would implement a non-penal, non-criminal summary hearing process to replace the summary trial system. This change would ensure that minor breaches of military discipline are dealt with efficiently while maintaining the fairness of the overall system. An example of the service infraction that could be caught up by these changes would be something like absent without leave, or AWOL for short. It is these types of offenses we are looking to address with this legislation. It also demonstrates trust and confidence in military leaders who can address minor breaches of discipline at their level. Taken together, these changes proposed through our new legislation are important in modernizing the military justice system and maintaining its responsiveness toward breaches of military discipline. Our Prime Minister gave me a mandate to establish and maintain a workplace free from harassment and discrimination. Our defense policy, Strong, Secure, and Engaged, emphasized the importance of looking after our women and men in uniform and ensuring that victims are supported through the military justice system. And that is why I'm extremely proud to be speaking to Bill C-77 today. And not only will Bill C-77 ensure that our Canadian Armed Forces members are protected by a military justice system that keeps pace with Canadian concepts of justice, it will make sure that victims are supported and heard. So I look forward to the committee providing a full review and analysis of this legislation, and I look forward to your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister. I just remind anyone in the room, if they have a cell phone or an iPad, if you could turn the ringer off, would be appreciated. And to members, 30 seconds. If someone sees this, if they could wind down in 30 seconds or less, I will be very disciplined on passing the floor to the next speaker because we have limited time. The floor is yours, Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming today to appear before the committee to talk about this very significant piece of legislation. We know that the former Conservative government introduced a similar bill just days before the legislature rose prior to an election, which I guess was at best just bad timing, as it would have been nearly impossible to get this through the House and the Senate in 5 or 6 days. But I do note that there are two major differences between that piece of legislation and the one that has been presented to the House and is now before committee. And they vastly differ on the 2 points. One is the GLADU principle, and the other is the offender identity and gender expression components. And I'm wondering if you can comment as to how these two were introduced. Was it done through the consultative process that you've been undertaking over the last few years? And how important you see these as being towards the piece of legislation?
No, thank you very much. A great question. I think we can all agree that the importance of this bill and moving it through as quickly as possible through a parliamentary process. These steps here, when we conduct our defense policy review, while having these greater discussions, the JAG branch was also conducting a thorough review inside on what the changes that we needed to make. We needed to make sure that when we're putting this legislation, are there any things that we needed to add, adjust, to making that it's ensure that it's in line not only with our governments and the direction that we're going with the criminal justice system, but also with our defense policy as well, and these changes do just that.
Can you talk about the consultation that did occur over the last few years to get us to this point? What consultation was involved in the process? Any of the outcomes? Any other specific clauses of the bill that stem from those consultations?
I'll get the JAG to speak to the actual detailed consultations, but when it comes to the defense policy review and looking at the wider aspect, how we're going to be looking at the Canadian Armed Forces, which is guides now the Canadian Armed Forces, how we need to manage almost everything that we do. As you know, it was extremely thorough right across the country, making sure that we spoke with experts, community leaders, the military, and especially members of Parliament having the opportunity to weigh in. Jay?
Thank you. So, of course, when we're looking at the analysis of the bill and the legal policy considerations that need to come into play, we consult with all of the military justice system actors in order to ensure that the changes that are being proposed will also meet their requirements. We also very much consult with our colleagues from the Department of Justice, because one of the aims that we're trying to achieve with with the military justice system is to ensure that it keeps pace with Canadian law, that it keeps pace with Canadian values, and that cannot be done in isolation. That needs to be done in consultation with all of the legal actors in Canada. So those would have been also the consultations that would have occurred. The other very important piece is consultation with the chain of command themselves. So actors who use the military justice system on a daily basis to ensure that the military justice system continues to meet the needs of the Canadian Armed Forces every single day.
Can you comment on how the bill helps to discourage behavior that motivated prejudice or hatred based on gender identity or expression in the military justice system?
With the changing of the system to a summary hearing process, it allows for a much more quicker when you have minor infractions or things of discipline that needs to be dealt with. It allows the chain of command to be far more responsive, and that's, I think, is very important. It allows them to deal with disciplinary issues very quickly, and that, in essence, also provides the ability at the lower level to making sure that issues that if you let over time become a lot bigger, they can be dealt with at the early stages.
Can you comment as to how many or what percentage of the matters that were before the court prior were of those smaller offenses or the less significant offenses?
I'll explain I don't know if the JAG has got the numbers for that, but I mean, having gone through the system myself as a former CEO, a lot of burden was put into it when it was a summary trial of a very legal mechanism where commanding officers, you got a qualification for it, but there's no way for anybody to be unless you're a lawyer. And what this does is takes that complexity of a legal system, puts it into where it needs to be with the experts, and allows for the discipline piece to be kind of managed. So in terms of I don't have exactly the numbers, but the point being is this will speed up the process and allow for even the bigger cases to move even faster. Jag?
Yes, thank you. So I will refer here to the annual report that I am mandated by the National Defence Act to present to the Minister on an annual basis, and that was tabled in Parliament at the beginning of the month. And we have statistics there that indicate that 90% of matters that are dealt with by the military justice system are currently dealt with by summary trial. So this is the vast, vast majority of it, and C-77 would go to the heart of addressing the ability of the chain of command to maintain an ability to address disciplinary issues at the unit level.
And do you think it will be more effective by going to the chain of command to deal with these less significant offenses?
Absolutely. This will allow the chain of command. This is something that the chain of command was very responsive to, because it's going to allow greater flexibility for commanding officers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. MP Bazan.
I want to thank the Minister and Madam Jag for being with us today. Minister, it was just brought to my attention that there's a security forum out in Victoria that you weren't able to attend. I haven't heard whether or not you're going to be at the Halifax Security Forum. Are you going to be able to make that this year?
Yeah.
You're going to be at Halifax? So you've been at every one since you've been Minister?
Yes, I have.
At the Halifax one. In 2015 would have been your first one. Between November 20th and 22nd, 2015, in your meeting with Irving, did you have Minister Bryson there on the phone, or was he actually? This is relevant. He just answered the question on the security forum, and now that's part of the witness testimony. I want to.
There's a point of order on the floor, and Mr. Spangman,
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think the committee has invited the minister to testify to Bill C-77. I don't see at all how that is relevant to the topic that's at issue here today.
As it relates, as the point of order is to relevance in accordance to C-77 and the Act to amend the National Defence Act and to make related and or consequential amendments to other acts, I tend to agree the point of order is sustained.
I just would say that that he witnessed his testimony, and the minister did talk about Halifax Security Forum. I want to ask a question about the Halifax Security Forum. It is on the record.
sustain the
Well,
point
you know,
of
I
order.
don't think
So
the
let's
minister
move on.
needs the protection of Cherry. He's a veteran. He's a police officer. I think that he's more than able to answer.
Do you have a relevant question, Mr. President?
So let's drill down. It'd be interesting to find out what happened at that meeting with Irving that was not publicly disclosed. So let's look at, according to the most recent report of the Auditor General on the administration of justice in the Canadian Armed Forces, one of the major problems identified in the military justice system was a lack of timely disclosure of evidence for the accused so they could adequately address the charges against them. So do you agree it could harm the person's defense if a person is not given adequate disclosure in order to defend their case? Yes or no?
I'm going to pass the answer, but just in terms of this Bill C-70, how important it is, let's remember that your government put this in at the dying days of the last Parliament, how important this bill is to looking after our people. And I think this is where I think we need to keep focused as all members of Parliament, that this is about our women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces, and not allow other issues to kind of take away from this very important
Actually,
bill.
directly
Jack,
related.
be able to answer that question?
Mr. Chair, this is directly related, Minister, to the Auditor General report, the third report from the spring. They just were at committee with Commodore Bernatchez, and it was a fairly controversial meeting because of the timeline and the failure on making sure that the principles of Jordan decision is upheld within the Canadian Armed Forces, that there needs a timely legal process. So why are we not getting that information to members so they can properly defend themselves before the JAG?
And with this bill, it's going to allow us to be more efficient in making sure that we can actually move cases a lot faster by hitting, as the JAG said, 90% of where the blockages are, making it easier for the chain of command to go through
So it does stand to reason then that members should be given all information so they can properly defend themselves?
We want to make sure that
the
legal process is followed.
Okay, then, you know, currently our government has chosen not to disclose critical information for the defense team of Vice Admiral Norman. This failure to disclose critical information, this is military justice.
Point of order. The Norman.
Again, just, we don't even have to keep talking about
pausing time?
No, we're not pausing the time. You're choosing to continue that line of question is not in relation to the order of
not
reference.
gonna
That
take
is
my
your
time.
choice, and I'm not stopping the clock. And I'd ask you for the second time to stay on track to what is in the order of reference, please, Mr. President.
Okay. What time am I at?
Got about 3.5 minutes.
3.5 minutes. Okay. In 2007, two petty officers working at DNT in Ottawa, Sylvia Reed and Janet Sinclair, who held top secret security clearance, were charged with sabotaging a classified military database, conspiracy, and mischief. And this happened while we were at war with Afghanistan, and these were highly unusual charges, very serious charges. Now, these two individuals were accommodated. They were not sent home. They were reassigned to other tasks that did not involve classified materials, pending the allegation being adjudicated in court. So why is their treatment different under military law than what's currently happening in civil court with Vice Admiral Norman?
I think very important here is the process that we're trying to go with Bill C-77 is making sure that we create greater efficiencies with the military justice system so that we can deliver a greater justice for the victims, and that they're even better supported. Making sure that the cases actually go through in a much more efficient manner, and also to making sure that it's in line with the direction of our wider legislation. I think it's extremely important for us, and I'll just remind all parliamentarians again, this is very important legislation that we need to get through. And we should take this thing, take the aspects of this very seriously, to making sure that we have the right input and from all of you, so that we can, if any improvements that needs to be made, we can look at this.
So under military law, in order for a Canadian Armed Forces member to be found guilty, there first has to be an investigation by a member of a military unit, in which the Auditor General said is taking far too long. There needs to be an investigator from the military forces, or the Canadian Forces Military Police Group, or the National Investigative Service. Was there an investigation performed like that for Vice Admiral Norman's case at all?
I can't discuss, obviously, because this is before the courts, but any type of case within the military, our military police, the National Investigative Service, do phenomenal work on behalf of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Does Bill C-77 change the way an investigation happen under military law for commanding officers?
As I think you should be well aware, the changes to the system that we're providing is taking the summary trial system and putting the serious offenses into the court-martial and changing where commanding officers will be dealing with a summary hearing process to deal with minor infractions that will focus on unit cohesion and discipline. Chad, do you have anything to add to that?
Commissioner, so allow me to quote Section 71 of the Military Rules of Evidence, specifically the section on government privilege of disclosure. And it says, except as provided in this division or an act of the Parliament of Canada, there is no official government privilege to withhold relevant evidence from a court-martial. So if it's good that evidence should be turned over for a court-martial, shouldn't Vice Admiral Norman, who was...
Point of order. Mr. Chair, the Norman case is being tried before a civil court. We're here to discuss Bill C-77, which has to do with the military justice system, and I would argue that this is completely irrelevant.
Point of order.
That's sustained, and Mr. Bazan's been cautioned twice on this very same issue, and he's got 7 seconds left, and I'm going to be moving the chair over to Mr. Gerritsen, but you have a point of order.
So it should not take from his time. Okay, so what Mr. Gerritsen said was that because this is not a court-martial, in any case, what I would like to know is with C-77, to that point of order, does...
It's been sustained. We're moving forward. Do you have a new point of order or not?
I'm speaking to his point of order, and that is that he said that this is different than a court-martial, but why would Admiral Norman not be going through a court-martial, which is supposedly more serious?
Again, there's absolutely no relevance there, Mr. Chair.
You have 7 seconds left, Mr. Bazan. Would you like to take your 7 seconds?
Yes, I would. I'd like to move the following motion that consider Bill C-77 clarifies that Canadian Armed Forces members are subject to the Code of Service Discipline even while off-duty, and considering that Vice Admiral Norman is a serving member who is believed to have committed a service offense, that the committee call on the government to immediately table all documents relevant to the Vice Admiral Norman's court proceedings, including all relevant cabinet documents, and the government waive cabinet confidence in order to provide Vice Admiral Norman with the full disclosure he is seeking to conduct his defense. And that is notice of motion.
Mr. Gerritsen.
If Mr. Bazan's moving that motion, I think it's quite ironic that at the beginning of this meeting he started off by chastising the Liberal Party for having a motion on the floor of the House to interrupt the time that the minister had with us. So therefore, I would move that we adjourn debate on his motion.
Just table notice.
You moved a motion.
Table notice of motion.
It was a notice of motion, so... Jesus. Mr. Gerritsen, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, it's good to see the minister here today. I, too, was one who was disappointed he didn't make the Maritime Security Challenges Conference in Victoria last week. Let me say there are clearly 2 improvements over the previous legislation. I want to acknowledge both of those. One is recognizing the special circumstances of Aboriginal members who serve in the forces and may come into conflict with the Code of Conduct. And the second is adding to the section on crimes motivated hatred, gender identity and expression. So I do thank the minister for those 2 improvements. It's a little ironic the minister comes to us and asks for timely passage of the bill when it's taken 3 years to get here, but I don't want to be churlish, so I'll just set that aside at this point. And what we've had, I guess, is a very long process to reform the military justice system. It's taken nearly 20 years to do that. It took a bill in the last Parliament, and this bill completes a lot of that, especially when it comes to improving victims within the system. And I want to acknowledge that that is a very important part of what this bill does. There's one piece I think both bills have missed in the overhaul of the military justice system and in adjusting offenses and penalties. And that is particularly evident to me in light of the new suicide prevention strategy that was introduced a year ago. We still have members of the Canadian Forces dying by suicide at a rate of just over 1 a month. And I appreciate the Chief of Defence Staff and the Minister both saying 0 is the goal, and I acknowledge that. And so the Canadian military has tried to remove barriers to getting help for those who are contemplating self-harm. And the military ombudsman identified that there are a lot of obstacles to getting the help that even then exists. So the families of those who died by suicide have identified one barrier, and that is that self-harm remains a disciplinary offense under the Military Code of Conduct. So I will, as I've told the Minister, be moving an amendment to delete Section 98C that makes self-harm a disciplinary offense. I've spoken with members of the Canadian military at all levels, and it passes the nod test with them, especially because the disciplinary sanction isn't really used. It's not seen as something effective at this point. But the families point out that people are still trained to this code of conduct where it identifies a possible disciplinary action as a result of self-harm. And so what I'm proposing does not remove the section on malingering or exaggerating illness to deliberately avoid service. It would simply remove self-harm as a disciplinary offense. So I asked the Minister in the House, he said he would consider it. I'm going to ask him again today, will he support the amendment to remove self-harm as a disciplinary offense in the Military Code of Conduct?
No, actually, I appreciate the thoroughness that of how you've brought this forward, and I think it's very important for us to making sure that we look at any potential barriers that will prevent a member from wanting to seek help, especially when it comes at their time of need. And that's something that we are going to be looking at. However, at the same time, I do need to make sure that I take a look at all aspects of when it comes to the reasons why some of these provisions were actually in there. And I remind members and Canadians is, we have a tremendous Canadian Armed Forces, but the military is also designed to serve at a time of outright conflict. And some of these, our criminal justice, our military justice system is designed also on that. So I absolutely take your point regarding making sure that we remove any barriers, even perceived barriers. And this is something we need to do a little bit more, have a greater discussion on.
Just going to intervene for one quick second. You've got about 3 minutes left on the clock. We had an undertaking only to keep you to the top of the hour. Minister, if you need to leave now, that's fine, or you could finish with this member for 3 minutes, and I'll leave that to you, sir.
No, I want to finish with Mr. Gerson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I guess the concern you raise is precisely why I'm only suggesting removing Section C, which deals with self-harm, and not tampering with the other two sections of that, which deal with the things I think you're referring to, that in the heat of combat, someone not doing their duty, malingering or exaggerating illness, which would place others at risk. And I acknowledge that. And all I am attempting to do, and I believe that if you consult the experts on this, the military commanders would still have full powers to sanction those deliberately avoiding service. It simply removes that reference to self-harm as being automatically a disciplinary offense.
If I had the full military advice and we felt that this is the direction to go, we would do it right now. But right at this time, I need to have a much more thoughtful, thorough conversation within the military chain to making sure that we go in the right direction, and at the same time, take into account your careful consideration on this.
With respect, Mr. Minister, I would say if we don't do this as part of this bill, we risk this Parliament will die. This will not be removed legislatively for the foreseeable future. We're talking 3 or 4 years delay if it's not part of this bill. So I would ask the Minister to seek that advice in a timely manner and get back to us as soon as he can so that we can consider this as part of this bill. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to past the time. Thank you for staying a few minutes extra, and I'm going to adjourn to see the Minister off and put new witnesses in the chair so we can continue. Did you want to?
I just want to say something for the record here, is we all know that this important bill is about our looking after our members, and I tried to take the partisan politics out of things that we do. And I just ask members, my great colleagues here, to take this into account, to not use this as an opportunity to delay something that's very important. And as you know, that was placed at the end of the 41st Parliament. This is in all our interest in making sure that we look after our people. Thank you.
Suspended. Welcome back. I'd like to acknowledge Colonel Strickney, Deputy Judge Advocate General, and Lieutenant Colonel Lortie, Director of Law, Military Justice and Policy. Thank you for joining us. We'll resume questioning, and I'll yield the floor for a 7-minute question to Mr. Spangeman.
Thank you, all three of you, for your service, for being with us. Good to have you back, Commodore. My first question is about, first of all, I want to say that I'm excited about this bill. I think this bill solves some issues, closes some gaps, specifically to the fundamental premise that the Canadian Forces should be an employer of choice for all Canadians. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the outcome of this bill ultimately being used at the recruitment stage to engage young Canadians who are considering the armed forces, especially with military law not being something that's very visible, that's very well known, but with some very fundamental provisions, important provisions, especially on victims' rights. Do you see this being used at the recruitment phase as a door opener, if you will, for Canadians to consider the armed forces as a safe workspace in the sense that everybody is included and is being treated equally before military justice?
Thank you. I think that it's been said and needs to be reinforced that any inappropriate sexual behavior is something that is not acceptable in the Canadian Armed Forces and any militaries. There is a variety of factors, a variety of tools that we're currently using in order to eradicate such behavior. Operation Honor is one of them, and it calls to bear the action of the chain of command, Sexual Misconduct Response Center, the strategic response team regarding sexual misconduct. But one of the centerpiece, also one of the tool being put at the disposition of the chain of command is the military justice system and what it does in order to ensure that such conduct is appropriately addressed. And we are now keeping pace with the rest of society with this bill. This bill would provide us with an opportunity to provide victims of inappropriate sexual behavior the type of support that they want and that they deserve within the military justice system. And I think that needs to be communicated, not only internally in the Canadian Armed Forces, but certainly something that needs to be communicated outside to Canadians. And what we're doing today is very much of that process where we're talking very publicly about this system and what it does for not only the Canadian Armed Forces, but to meet Canadians' expectations.
And how it connects with Canadian values as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that. The Minister in his opening remarks stated that the bill seeks harsher penalties for crimes motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on gender identity or expression. To the extent that you're able to ascertain and maybe even put some numbers on it, prior to this bill having been introduced, how much of a problem were those kinds of crimes, bias, prejudice, or hate, either leading to full offenses or even below that threshold as misconduct incidents?
Thank you. So I will probably pass this on to one of my two experts, my colleagues. I do not believe that we have specific data on how many of these offenses have been dealt with within the military justice system. But certainly what that section of the bill would do is to very much align the military justice system with the rest of the civil and criminal justice system. And it's a reflection of Section 718.2 of the Criminal Code of Canada.
Thank you.
Do you have something to add?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question. Just to add on what the Judge Advocate General has mentioned, certainly the aggravating factors do mirror 718.1 or 718.2, pardon me, in the Criminal Code. I would add as well that traditionally we have done research in the JAG annual reports on breaking down various offenses. So as the JAG alluded to, we're not clear if the extent to if that issue had a significant effect. Those are certainly things that we will look at now that the provision is in place. Just a little bit of history as well on the provision is the addition of sexual expression into an aggravating factor in 718.2 was part, as you know, I'm sure, sir, of Bill C-16, that at that point did not take into account Bill C-77. So what this does, in effect, is, as the JAG mentioned, mirror 718.2 to track the current language in Bill C-16.
Very much. That's helpful.
And if I may add, I think that this is very much in keeping from a legal policy perspective with ensuring that we have a force that is free of these type of behaviors, one that is based on honor, honesty, integrity, so very much aligned with the military ethos as well.
Are you in a position to comment where Bill C-77 places us with respect to our trusted coalition partners when we go overseas and do peace operations, peacekeeping, for example, the UK, France, the United States? How do their legal frameworks look compared to ours? And what does C-77 accomplish with respect to how we stand up against or stand with our allies on these issues?
Thank you for that question. Certainly, in terms of our allies, if I could draw a spectrum, if you will, across our Western allies, with the U.S. being at one end and France being at the other, we and Australia are somewhere in the middle, such that the United States has maintained a commanding officer in such a way as they can convene courts-martial and things like that, so they very much remain an actor in terms of processing courts-martial more serious offenses. That being said, with the changes in 1999 that Bill C-25 brought forth, essentially taking the commanding officer out of the court-martial system, we have maintained that type of independence. Through a series of European Court of Human Rights judgments in the 1990s, the UK has sought to further civilianize their system. So in terms of, to answer your question, the summary hearing system in Bill C-77 would mirror to a very rough extent what they call non-judicial punishment in the United States, such that the commanding officer can mete out very minor punishments for very minor offenses. The UK have a similar system, as does the Australians.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We're going to go to 5-minute questions now, and the first 5-minute question is going to go to MP Fisher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here for this very important bill. The Auditor General, in the spring report, recommended that the Government of Canada ensure that cases move expeditiously through the military justice system. How specifically will Bill C-77 ensure that that actually happens?
Thank you. So the first thing that I would like to inform the committee about is that the Department of National Defense completely accepted and agreed with all of the OAG findings and recommendations, developed a sound management action plan that is currently being implemented. So that's something that we're looking over the horizon, items by items. We're already doing a lot about this. One of the issues raised, as you noted, by the Auditor General was the issue of timeliness in ensuring that matters would proceed in a timely manner within the military justice system. What C-77 does by introducing the summary hearings and leaving at the unit disciplinary level the minor disciplinary breaches ensures and would ensure that the more serious issues only get retained at the court-martial level. So it is anticipated that by streamlining the process, by keeping the minor disciplinary matters at the unit level and keeping the serious ones for courts-martial, that it would declog the system, streamline the system, and cut in the delays in a very significant fashion.
Thank you. Bill C-77 has an Indigenous sentencing provision to ensure extenuating circumstances are considered during sentencing and, more specifically, incarceration. Does this provision address the systemic racism and discrimination often found in criminal justice systems? And can you elaborate on why this specific provision will ensure fairness for Indigenous CAF members?
Sentencing considerations as it pertains to Indigenous people are very much in keeping with the practice that is currently being implemented and has been implemented for years by courts martial. So it would in fact enshrine in statute the current practice of the court martial that is very much guided by the 1999 decision in Gladue from the Supreme Court of Canada. By enshrining these considerations into statute, what it does, it gives a formal recognition of the importance to ensure that specific considerations that pertain to Aboriginal are taken into consideration at the sentencing stage. So, as with any offender, judges will have to consider the mitigating, aggravating factors that go into sentencing. In the specific cases of Indigenous, they will have to take into consideration their specific circumstances.
Time left?
A little less than 2.
Thank you. For those of us around the table who have not served in the military, can you explain to us how service offenses differ from offenses committed outside of the service? What's the greater impact?
Thank you. Well, to put it bluntly, Canadians have an expectation that they will have a very disciplined force. This is at the heart of democracy, a force that can be controlled because it is force that may be called upon to use up to lethal force in order to achieve governmental objectives. The military justice system ensures that there's a disciplined force, that these higher expectations on serving members can be effectively implemented. It ensures the discipline, the efficiency, the operational efficiency of that force, and also the morale. Because a functioning force needs to be cohesive and needs to have high morale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'll yield the floor to MP Martel.
Thank you for being here with us today. My question will be in French. We know that in the Canadian Armed Forces, in fact, in most of the Western Armed Forces, there is a concept of malingering and simulating an illness or an injury to escape military duty. Could you tell us here how many service members have been found guilty of Section 98 since the Second World War, so of malingering? Thank you. I don't have that information since the Second World War, but I do have data since the year 2000, January 2000. What we have found is that there were 4 cases sent to court-martial under 98, Section 98 of the National Defense Act. However, these 4 were withdrawn once the court-martial considered them. As for summary conviction approaches, 13 charges were laid under 98 of the Defense Act, and 9 of them led to a finding of guilt. Yes, the member was found guilty, and 3 were simply stayed, and 1 did not even go to court-martial. So this is a rather small number since the year 2000 of cases. As for any other statistics, we would have to see what might be available and what we might obtain for you. Are you able to tell me how many of these had considerable mental health issues? You know, among these cases, these charges that were laid, these people, I don't have that information. If a member of the Canadian Armed Forces has a mental health problem and has committed an offense under Article 98, do the Canadian Armed Forces have a discretionary power to not lay charges, but to send them for treatment? And do we know how often that occurs? So what I would like to state again for the members of the committee, as Honourable Minister Sajjan has said himself, the issue of mental health is one of high importance protect the Canadian Armed Forces as of a number of years now. We are very aware of the importance of this issue. When you consider Section 98 of the National Defence Act, especially subsection C, paragraph C, you see that it requires that there be a willful intention to cause self-harm in order to avoid service, as you have pointed out. It's clear to us that anyone with a mental health problem doesn't have an intention to avoid service. It's really an illness. It's like, much like having lost an arm or a leg. It's a diagnosable situation, mental health issues, and our military doctors and other specialists are able to diagnose these illnesses. So in response to your question, it's quite clear that there would be a discretionary approach on the part of the legal officials in deciding whether a charge would be laid. There's also a chain of command discretion, and intelligent analysis must be made of the case to take into account the circumstances of this particular person to ensure that all elements for laying the charge are present. Another question. The Judge Advocate General and the Canadian Armed Forces. Would they accept amendments to Section 98 that would protect the ability of the Canadian Armed Forces to manage malingering whilst protecting all members who are suffering from mental health issues? Well, as a legal advisor, I have listened to the exchanges over the last hour or so, and of course we will support the committee by providing analysis that will assist you in making your decisions in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for being here. I'm glad that we finally have C-77 on the table. I was very much impacted, and I'm sure many across this country was impacted by the Deschamps report that talked about the rampant sexual abuse that was within the Canadian Armed Forces. I know that we have Operation Honor in place. I know that we have Bill C-65. I know that this bill will also be part of helping to address some of the findings in that report. And I wonder if you could maybe outline to me, how will C-77 help female victims of sexual assault? So what improvements in here actually helps female victims of sexual assault?
Thank you. So obviously the bill aims at introducing victims' rights within the military justice system, victims being men or women or members of different sexual identification. What this bill would do is to provide victims a right to information, so a right to be informed of every single step of the process, a right to be informed about the general information, the status of the investigation, about the offender as well while in or released from a service prison. There would be a right to protection, so the security and the privacy of the victims would be considered by the military authorities. There would be a reasonable and necessary measures put in place to protect from intimidation, retaliation. There would be also identity protection and testimonial aids on request at courts-martial. There would be a right to participation of the victim. So they would be formally enshrined in legislation. They would be able to convey their views regarding the decisions that are made. And they would have also the right to present a victim statement, a victim impact statement at court-martial. And finally, there would be a right to restitution.
In creating this final bill, I know we talked about consultation, who was consulted. Did we actually consult with those who are former victims of sexual assault as part of this process?
Certainly, as you are well aware, Bill C-71 was introduced into Parliament in a previous iteration. This time around,
we consult with former female victims of sexual assault within the Canadian Armed Forces? Did we consult this time around? Like, did they look at the bill and say yes, or the draft aspects of it and say, you know, we're comfortable, we're not comfortable, here's where it needs to be strengthened, here's what we like, this is what we don't like? Like, have we actually gone to those victims and consulted with them?
So I'm not able to answer whether we have specifically consulted about the disposition of the bill, but what I can say, however, is that the Director of Military Prosecution has already in place a lot of these practices that we're currently looking in the bill that would be enshrined in legislation. And the Director of Military Prosecution has been very much engaged with victims groups in explaining these different processes and seeking their views as how they could be improved, and what they agreed, disagreed with. So that has occurred. But as it pertains to specifically the bill, I think that we benefited from the overall consultation that the current Canadian criminal justice system benefited from when it enshrined victim bills of right in Canadian legislation.
And if you could just tell me, is there a time limit to bring a case forward? So, for example, if, say, sexual assault happened 10 years ago under this current bill, is that something that can be brought forward, or 30 years ago or 20 years ago? Is there a time limit around that?
There's no statute of limitations, if you will, vis-a-vis offenses in the National Defence Act, which is currently enshrined in the law. So in any case, other than some matters that are proceeded with before summary trial, but I think, ma'am, in particular to your question, dealt with sexual assault offenses. As it stands currently, the state of the law post-1999 is such that there is no limitation period vis-a-vis serious service offenses.
How long do I have?
You don't have any time left.
Okay, thank you so much.
MP Coulon.
Reported that due to the Beaudry decision, there are 42 court-martials being affected. What number are related to sexual assault of the 42?
I don't have this information at the tip of my hand. I would have to get back to the committee with that information.
Okay, so do you know whether or not any of the victims in these cases have been advised that the charges have been dropped?
So I do know that there are sexual assault cases that are impacted by the situation. The Director of Military Prosecution has taken it very seriously to ensure that victims' interest would be taken into consideration. He has kept an open line of communication with the victims. The charges are not dropped, so I want to make sure that this is on the record and understood. At this time, what is happening is that we are not proceeding. The Director of Military Prosecution is not proceeding with these charges. So the ones that were before the court-martials have been adjourned until such time as we get an indication from the Supreme Court of Canada whether it will grant the application for the stay of the decision of Beaudry.
So if charges have been dropped, even though the perpetrator has admitted that he sexually assaulted, in fact, raped the victim, and she was subsequently told that the charges are going to be dropped, it's not in relation to the Beaudry decision.
What I want to make clear, and I'm not sure that I understand the question, and I apologize for that, but what I want to make clear is that as a result of the decision of the Court-Martial Appeal Court in Beaudry, charges have not been dropped. At this point, the matters are still before the court-martial, but have been adjourned until we have a better understanding of the decision of the Supreme Court of Canada.
Okay, so in cases where they are dropped and brought to civilian court, will the victims be penalized in any way? Will their careers be affected if they do indeed take the charges that have been dropped by the military, even though the perpetrator of the crime admitted that he did it? Will the victim be penalized in any way career-wise should she decide to take it to a civilian court?
I'm sorry if I don't understand the question, but there has been no charges that have been dropped.
Okay. So is there any chance the delays caused by appealing the Beaudry decision could make any of the 42 cases violate the Jordan decision for timely access to trials?
For sure, this is something that the Director of Military Prosecution has in mind. There's an 18-month time period that is afforded for a case to proceed. And as we're monitoring the situation, the Director of Military Prosecution has already started to engage into a dialogue with his colleagues of the civilian prosecution to see what would be the alternative and what will be the options moving forward.
So if the charges are dropped in a military court with the C-77, is there the option for the victim to take them to civilian court? Or once it's been tried in a military court or not tried, is it negated to going forth to civilian court?
So to answer the question, once a charge is laid in front of the military justice system, it needs to proceed within that system. Whether charges are laid in the military justice system or civilian court is a matter that is being discussed with the victims, with the prosecutor on file, because we have the best interest of the victim at heart, balancing that interest, of course, with the accused rights. If the matter, and it's so hypothetical at this point, I feel very uneasy to provide an answer on that because we still don't know what the Supreme Court of Canada will say.
Okay, and does C-77 encompass the ramifications of the Jordan decision?
C-77 does not specifically address the Jordan decision because it is a matter of law in Canada that there is an 18-month time period that is afforded for a matter to proceed.
Okay, and with...
That's time. Deputy Robillard.
Monsieur le Président, bienvenue aux témoins. Comment la juge avocate générale travaille-t-elle avec le Centre d'intervention sur l'inconduite sexuelle pour assurer le soutien des victimes?
Merci beaucoup pour cette question. Alors, le docteur Preston et moi travaillons de façon très étroite depuis ma nomination pour s'assurer qu'il y ait une harmonisation des services qui sont offerts par son centre et une complémentarité du service du système de justice militaire. Évidemment, quand on parle de l'appui qui est donné aux victimes dans le cadre des Forces armées canadiennes, le système de justice militaire est un...
Excuse me, just hold it there for a second. We have a translation problem, and I'm going to see if I can get that sorted out.
So to summarize what I was saying, we work very closely with the Victim Resource Center and the Judge Advocate General's office. Victim advocacy. There's a number of services that can be offered to victims. And these can be discussed as to what the proper grounds for deciding which is appropriate. Legal support during the legal system process, of course. It can be difficult for the victims to understand, and they can be supported through this. Also, what are the restitution approaches that could be used in military justice approaches, and what are the other tools available outside of the strict justice systems and various retribution approaches. So the team of the Victim Support Center and I work closely together to ensure that we provide seamless service. We know that the military justice process can be difficult to understand. So how does Bill 77 help ensure that victims' rights are protected by providing them with a liaison officer who can help them understand the system? I think that any criminal justice system can be quite intimidating to victims. These processes are very formal, and there are a number of procedures that people who aren't familiar with them will find uncomfortable. The victim liaison officer ensures that the victim understands the military justice system, what the ins and outs of it are, and what the stages of it are as well, and what support the victim will have available to them throughout the procedure. I would like to also mention that the Resource Center for Victims of Sexual Misconduct within the Forces announced in its annual report that it will shortly be setting up case managers, approaches, case officers for victims, also able to support victims, not solely within the military justice process, but throughout their case experience, inasmuch as they will have had an unfortunate experience that they want to speak up about right through the resolution of the system, and these will be complementary approaches. Thank you. How does Bill C-77 make it easier to proceed in a timely manner in summary procedure matters, in matters of service infractions? And will this help deal with the backlog identified by the Auditor General in his spring report? Yes, of course. C-77 intends to bring in a summary procedures approach that will keep within military units themselves the management of service infractions, minor infractions, let's say coming into work late, one's uniform isn't in proper condition, that sort of matter. By ensuring that these minor service infractions are handled by commanders within their units, we will simplify procedures and send only serious cases to court-martial. This will simplify things at court-martial, and we really expect this to reduce delays, which will be indirectly in response to one of the Auditor General's concerns.
Given we have limited time today, I just want to make one remark on your testimony on the section regarding considering the circumstances of Indigenous people. I had some questions and concerns. Your testimony has already reassured me on those grounds. So I want to return to Section 98 and ask two different things. Given that Bill C-77 is about reforming the justice system, that it does change some infractions and does add some penalties and things, would you think that removing Section C would be within the general purposes of this bill? In other words, it's not something that wouldn't fit in this bill in terms of reforming military justice, or not?
What I would like to say is that you will be hearing from a lot of expert witnesses throughout the analysis of this bill. I think that it is for this committee to arrive at a determination of what would be the legal policy considerations that would be should be taken into consideration. But for sure, a bill like C-77 presents an opportunity to address Parliament's preoccupation and considerations in order to ensure that the military justice system remains in pace with Canadian law and Canadian values, for sure.
There are three sections in Section 98. A, which says simply, every person who malingers or feigns or produces disease or infirmity, and then it goes on to the general nature of the clause, making that an offense. B talks about aggravating or avoiding cures, and it's only C that talks about willful self-harm. And so I guess my question to you, and maybe you can't answer it today, but maybe an advice that you're giving us is, what I see and what families see is that singling out willful self-harm becomes a barrier to treatment when the aim of the legislation is actually to prevent avoidance of service, and that would be covered under the Section A of malingering feigning or producing disease or infirmity. In other words, that there's still adequate power there for commanders in those situations where someone's deliberately avoiding service, and that taking out self-harm simply removes that perceived barrier to treatment. It wouldn't leave a legal gap. So I just wonder if you have an opinion on that at this point.
Perhaps my Deputy Judge Advocate General for Military Justice will want to add a few things, but we have a paucity of information right now as to the usage, past usage of Section 98 and whether it affected those who clearly suffered from mental illnesses and whether it prevented them from seeking appropriate treatment. So this is something that we would have to look at for sure.
Just to add very briefly what the JAG mentioned, as you know, sir, having looked at the provision, it is a specific intent provision. So legally speaking, the bar of 98C would be somewhat higher than that found in 98A and B. That's just simply from a legal perspective. I just point that out. However, as the JAG and both the minister mentioned, the JAG if the JAG asks, and I'm sure she will, her experts to look at this section, we'll certainly do so in consultation with our other subject matter experts to get back to this committee as soon as we can.
Thanks very much. On the question of evidence, of course, what I have heard is from families of members who died by suicide who clearly believed that this section was a barrier. In particular, a family in my riding whose son twice attempted to commit suicide and did not, they believe, seek help because of this section, believing that he would automatically disqualify himself from service if he admitted to self-harm or an intention to self-harm. So quite apart from the legal intent, and I understand what you're saying by creating a high bar, this may have actually been put in there for positive reasons, but the effect it seems to be having in the anecdotal evidence that I'm hearing is exactly the opposite, in that it creates a lower bar in the perception of members in the forces, saying that if I do confess to having these kind of thoughts, I will automatically be sanctioned. And therefore, that's what families are telling me that they hear is the barrier, that people don't want to seek any help because of this section.
I'm going to have to leave that opinion of the member and end the formal questioning as per our agreed upon time, I should say. We do have time on the clock, though, and I had at least two members that indicated they wanted questions. So I'll give Mr. Bazan the floor for 5 minutes, and then Mr. Spengeman, and there still be a little bit of time left. So if someone wants more time, just get my attention, please. Mr. Bazan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Commodore Bernatchez, in your comments back and forth with Mr. Martel, you mentioned that you were going to provide information on how many people have been charged under Section 98. Could you also provide a greater clarification, if it's possible, how many were under Sections A, B, and C, you know, malingering, feigning, and self-harm, just so we have that picture. And also it would be useful, I think, for committee if under C, if you have access to the information on whether or not those individuals are offered treatment for mental health challenges that they have been dealing with. We've talked a little bit about the impact of Beaudry, and I did ask you this question yesterday as to the Auditor General's report, where it was a very critical analysis of how military justice has been carried out, and under Jordan, justice delayed is justice denied. My concern is that now that we are, as Ms. Glant said, now that we're sitting in limbo until we find out what we're doing with Beaudry, how are we going to determine whether or not the principles of Jordan are being respected under military justice? And if you could also talk, I thought you gave a good explanation yesterday about how Bill C-77 will help streamline processes and reduce the backlog that has caused problems during the time frame that the Auditor General did his analysis.
Thank you. So what I want to repeat here that I said yesterday is that I've given my personal commitment to see through the implementation of the Management Action Plan, because it is extraordinarily important for me that the military justice system remains a system that is not only in fact legitimate and in fact answering the requirements of the Canadian Armed Forces, but is seen as extremely important. Regarding how Bill C-77 would address the issue of timeliness, the issue of delays, what I want to say again is that by keeping at the unit level the minor disciplinary breaches, by removing the penal, criminal consequences that are currently attached to the summary trial process, which trigger a series of rights for accused in accordance with Canadian law, in accordance with the Canadian Charter, in order for the summary trial to be the legally sound system that it is, to simplify the process. So we remove the penal, we remove the criminal consequences from these type of infractions. We ensure that there is no criminal record associated with it. It's simple, basic disciplinary issues addressed at the unit level. So what does that mean? It means that we do not have to offer a right to election to the accused person. It means that we can streamline the process and decide at the outset that it will be one forum or the other. And as a result, what it does is that it cuts in the time that it takes for a matter to get resolved. And then we answer directly the Auditor General's preoccupation about the timeliness, the overall timeliness of the military justice system. If it gets addressed by a summary hearing quickly, if it goes to court-martial as a matter of fact to start with, you get all of the delays that are associated with election, referral of charges from one level to the other, review of charges by legal officers, the legal advice that needs to be provided in that process. You remove the time taken for that away and streamline the process and reduce the delays.
So is there any, I guess, potential criticism around the summary hearing that could possibly border on whether it's got fairness in it for the accused?
It is a system that has been thoughtfully and carefully analyzed in order to ensure that it complied with all of an accused's rights. And by removing the penal and the criminal consequences and ensuring that presiding officers continue to receive the appropriate training in the determining, that there are elements of procedural fairness, that it's something that requires going in with a view that the person in front of you is innocent until proven otherwise on a balance of probability. All of these procedural safeguards will remain there for that specific process.
You're well over. MP Spiegelman.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And all of my questions have been touched on. In fact, the most recent one, the first one was one that Mr. Bazan just engaged with you on. I wanted to follow up for the perception of the committee and perception of Canadians. When you push disciplinary dispute resolution to the unit level, there is a risk that there are different cultures of discipline that are emerging across units and across branches of the armed forces. And you made in your last answer some comment to the fact that there are procedural safeguards that would prevent that. Can I just zoom in a bit more and ask you what potential for discretion there is in the treatment of offences that, from the system's perspective, may be considered to be minor, but from the person who is involved, maybe not so minor, especially if it's repeat offences, to prevent sort of disparate cultures of discipline within the armed forces?
Certainly the bill is designed to, as some of the members may recall, as Chief Justice Dixon, when he reviewed the military justice system, stated that the commanding officer is at the heart of discipline. And certainly the esprit, the spirit, if you will, of the summary hearing system is that the commanding officer indeed remains that. There, of course, with any new system, there will be training. There will be training given. There will be there will be regulations that will be drafted through our Queen's Regulations and Orders that will outline specific details relating to the summary hearing system. Much like the current summary trial system, there is a back and forth in terms of the legal officers that provide advice to the commanding officers. That could in fact be the case with the summary hearing system. As the JAG testified yesterday before the Public Accounts Committee, she gave the analogy to the summary hearing system as the RCMP disciplinary system, or in fact a disciplinary system within the public service. So I think that is a very good analogy to reinforce to this committee that in fact the summary hearing process will very much look like that, with the particularities that we require to maintain good order, discipline, and morale in the Canadian Armed Forces.
I think that's very helpful to the committee. Thank you for that. Commodore, you mentioned the Sexual Misconduct Resource Center and an exchange, I believe, with my colleague, Monsieur Robillard. Could you just, for the benefit of the committee, elaborate on what that unit is all about, how it's structured, how it operates?
I would feel a lot more comfortable if you had Dr. Preston come and testify before committee. She explains it so much better than I do.
We will take note of that, and maybe there's a chance to circle back to her. Thank you. And then finally, Mr. Chair, I wanted to ask a question on the importance of restitution under the current military justice system and as it's transformed by Bill C-77. When does restitution come into play? How significant is it to a victim to be able to ask for restitution? And under what circumstances would restitution even be a factor?
Certainly with Bill C-77, as the JAG alluded to earlier in her testimony, that one of the rights that will be given in the Declaration of Victims' Rights, is restitution, in which the victim, the court must consider a restitution order and as well have that restitution ordered as a civil court judgment if not paid. So certainly is one of the four primary rights given in the Declaration of Victims' Rights, which mirrors, of course, the Canadian Victims' Bill of Rights in the civilian system. It certainly emphasizes the points that these rights, quasi-constitutional rights, are important to victims.
And have we got some numbers on past incidents? Is it correct, first of all, to assume that under the previous system there was no ability to ask for restitution?
Not at all, and I'll pass that along to my colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Ortiz.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to highlight that that right is already enforced in the National Defense Act. It's something that has been brought in force on September 1st, 2018, part of the Strengthening Military Justice Canada Act, known before by Bill C-15. So C-77 is adding provision to that, is giving more bones to it, but the right is already there in the Act and can be used by court-martial.
Would you be able to provide to the committee a number of how many restitution orders are generated by the military justice system over, let's say, just the last 3 years, to give the committee an appreciation of how significant a mechanism this is?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you. Thanks.
I'd like to thank all three of you for appearing today on this very important matter on C-77. Just to summarize, I believe there was an undertaking from you to provide the committee with some information under Section 98, and then the information, the number of restitution orders as cited by my colleague. So we would appreciate that in a timely fashion, as this is our highest priority, and we are aiming to get this back no later than the 30th of November. Of course, we will need time to see this information, so time is of the essence. And I would like to thank the three of you for your service to Canada. Mr. Garrison.
I believe that in another meeting we discussed the committee may finish its deliberations on evidence by the 22nd of November. So perhaps we'd like to advise the witnesses that that is our actual timetable to allow us time to deal with
fair enough.
The rest of the bill.
So more specifically, the 22nd, and as soon as possible would be greatly appreciated so we can actually consider this and work us into any recommendations we may have for the Government of Canada. Thank you for your service.